A guy whose mother raised him to think God would speak to someone and give them instructions on how to restore the church to its rightful glory. A guy whose father raised him to be a magical treasure hunter. Magical treasure hunter. That guy would find magical treasure that God revealed to him to help him restore the church to its rightful glory. Shut the front door. Are you flipping Josh and me? It almost feels like parental environment contributed more to Joseph's revelations than the word of God. Forgive my use of cold reason and obvious logic. Sorry to take a doo-doo on Joseph prayed.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to my next episode on the review of the Timesuck on Mormonism. This is stand-up comedian Dan Cummins. He has a podcast called Timesuck. I'll leave a link down in the description, but he does an episode on Mormonism. It's a long episode, so I'm breaking it up into several segments. So anyways, if you haven't seen the previous episodes, go ahead and check those out. I will try to link those below as well, or you can just find them on my YouTube page. Today we're going to get into the origins of the modern Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, aka the Mormon Church. So go ahead and we shall begin.
Let's start at the beginning, which is undefined time-wise according to the LDS. Christian and Mormon scholars place the origin of mankind at some point between 4.5 million years ago and 6,000 years ago. Many place it closer to the 6,000 kind of mark. The Garden of Eden, where it all began. And where is the Garden of Eden? Joseph Smith, as we said it was in, present-day Missouri. After getting kicked out of the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve lived in Adamandi-Ammon, a historic site in Daviess County, Missouri, about 5 miles south of Jameson, Missouri. Tiny little town of about 130 people. Man, what a fall from paradise. Nothing against Missouri. But getting kicked out of paradise? And then you gotta live in humid as Hades, bumflip, Missouri. Oh my heck. Bummer, gosh dang. Also, interesting to note that not only does the LDS doctrine teach that Eden is located in present-day Missouri, it also teaches that Adam and his descendants settled in present-day Missouri. Then expanded outward, away from that. And this is where man first learned how to wear animal skins for clothes, use fire, everything. Missouri is the cradle of civilization according to LDS doctrine. And I gotta say, this feels like the claim of a man who lived prior to the 20th century when the fields of archaeology and anthropology were much less developed. Teaching that human life began in Missouri goes against all current scientific evidence regarding the origins of humankind, like all of it. Current archaeological efforts point at humans first figuring out how to transition from grunts into words and stand upright in Africa, specifically Ethiopia. And then early humans migrated through to the Middle East, up to Europe, across to Asia, down into the South Pacific, Australia, and then the Americas. Going over that Bering Strait land bridge. The Americas, as far as all current evidence tells us, was the last place humans settled, not the first. Oh my heck, flippin' awkward. See, never be too specific when making prophecies. Good lesson here if you're going to form a cult. Learn from Nostradamus. Keep it vague. Be able to interpret it in numerous ways. Makes it harder to disprove. Then somewhere around 600 BCE, an Israelite named Lehi journeys with his family from the Middle East to the Americas. Also, this goes against everything we know about civilizations and their ability to travel long distances over water. But Lehi's descendants divide into two tribes, the Nephites and the Lamanites, named after two of Lehi's sons. The Nephites, initially more prosperous and religious, but then will become...
So the Mormons believe that's true because they believe that Lehi and his family, specifically Lehi's son Nephi, was instructed by God on how to build a boat that would sail from one continent to the other. And so, most civilizations at that time didn't have the ability to do long voyages like that across the ocean. In fact, I don't know if any of them had at that time. But as the saying goes, through God, all things are possible.
Well, first of all, through God, all things are possible, so jot that down.
So if, God knows how to do everything, then surely God could teach Nephi how to build a seaworthy boat, even though it was just them and their family. I mean, that still seems kind of incredible, thinking that they, a family, so a group of like 10, maybe 20 people would be able to build a ship that could cross, all the way from, Europe or Africa to, North and South America. Still pretty incredible. But, I mean, as with all religious beliefs, there's the element of faith and belief that God can do anything. So, I mean, if God could, have Moses part the Red Sea, which is just a physically impossible task, why not then, why couldn't he help them build a boat to cross the ocean? So that is the rationale on that issue right there. So continuing on.
Become corrupt over time, end up locked in centuries of warfare with the nomadic Lamanites. The Lamanites are who the Mormons considered the ancestors of the American Indians who murdered the Nephite believers. Not cool to be. I wonder if Mormon scholars, when they hear American Indians claim that the Europeans kicked them off their land, think, actually, we were the original land. You killed us if you go back far enough. The Book of Mormon states that around 33 CE, after his crucifixion and resurrection in the Middle East, Jesus Christ then appeared in North America and preached to the Nephites. Christ's appearance inaugurates a period of harmony with the Lamanites that would last 200 years. But eventually the tribes would fall into conflict again. In 385 CE, a Nephite prophet named Mormon had been writing the story of his people on the eve of a climactic battle with the Lamanites. Mormon turns over the core of what would become known as the Book of Mormon, transcribed onto golden plates, to his son Moroni. Mormon is mortally wounded in the battle at a place called Cumara, and the Nephites are nearly obliterated. But Moroni survives for another 36 years, adds material to the Book of Mormon before sealing up the plates in 421. Made it all the way to upstate New York with those plates. It's a considerable distance back then. Good job, Moroni. Very unfortunate that your name is one letter away from moron. That does not help the case for religious credibility. That Joseph would find magic gold plates because he was led to them by the angel of Moroni. That's a tough one. Now let's fast forward to the 19th century. It's time to meet Joseph Smith, right after I address some logic concerns that I have with Mormonism's origin story. In my opinion, the biggest difference between Christianity, Judaism, Islam, and then Mormonism is that with the big three major religions, worst case, somebody made up stories about real people, or I guess really worse, about real places. Like while we don't know if all the miracles and prophecies claimed in the text of the big three are true, at least the miracles supposedly occurred in places where other people were there to write about at least some of the members of the religion, at least some of the people referenced. There's corroborating evidence. We don't know if Jesus for sure existed, but we know that Jerusalem existed. We know that the way the Bible talks about the time and place, that these people supposedly lived in, it's accurate. The groups of people said to live in biblical cities did live there. The rulers referenced in these books did in fact rule. Other people wrote about them. There's a lot of archaeological evidence that supports the existence of many of the Bible's characters and the Quran's characters and the Torah's characters, but it's very different with the history of Mormonism. This is one reason why, in my opinion, religious scholars don't respect Mormonism and take it as seriously as other religions and never will. There is no evidence at all to support the existence of any of the people written about in the Book of Mormon in the Americas. None, unless you count American Indians. But no American Indian tribe has anything in their traditions that supports what was written about supposedly them in the Book of Mormon. Like the belief systems don't line up.
See, now this is an interesting point because growing up in the church, we were taught that there was a lot of archaeological evidence that supported, the Lamanites and Nephites being down there. They'd always talk about Quetzalcoatl, or however you say it, the feathered serpent god, and they would say that the Native Americans patterned that god after Jesus after he came to America because of all the similarities in the mythology and the stuff said about Jesus in the Bible. And I have pamphlets, not pamphlets, but I have papers, I believe I still have them somewhere, that talked about different stones and different translations of different ancient artifacts over there, and how they support the Mormon theory that the Nephites and Lamanites lived over there and that there are people who worship Jesus in the Americas. But as I grew up, I came to realize that those were just papers that were kind of circulated within the church to other church members, and I never actually had they weren't verified, as far as I knew, by actual archaeologists outside the church. Now I know BYU has a whole, the Mormon College, Brigham Young University, they have a whole college, and I'm sure department dedicated to researching and finding archaeological evidence that supports the church's claims. And the church says that there's a lot of material that the college and that they found a lot of material. But I don't know many or any really archaeologists outside of the Mormon church that support any of that material. And again, that's something I would like to go back and do a little more research, because it's been at least a decade or two since I've looked into that stuff, and I'm sure there's more information. We have better technology now, so either there's more information supporting it or more information not supporting it, and that would be interesting to find out. So I'll have to do an episode on that as well. But again, it's one of those things where you're told a lot of stuff within a certain circle, but you don't have, it's almost like you don't have any auditors, any external voices saying whether or not it's true. But in the church, you trust the people around you, you trust your leaders, you trust your mission president, your bishop, you trust, if you were to go to BYU, you trust your professors, you trust the prophet of the church. So if they're saying, oh yeah, we have a bunch of evidence for this, most members in the church aren't going to become archaeologists or do a lot of research to find that stuff out. And if they do, a lot of them will trust if there's a Mormon archaeologist, they'll trust their information and their sources maybe over a non-Mormon archaeologist. So yeah, again, like I said, that would be interesting, and maybe I'll have to do another episode on actual archaeology. But yeah, I don't know a lot of experts or archaeologists outside of the church that support the claims of these Nephite and Lamanite civilizations.
None of them think that they come from the Middle East, because there is zero evidence to support that. There's no genetic evidence to support that American Indians came from people who are Middle Eastern or Hebrew. There's a host of other problems. In Mormon scripture, sheep are mentioned as being raised in the Americas by the Jaredites between 2500 BC and 600 BC. But sheep did not show up in the Americas until Columbus's second voyage in 1493. Same with domestic goats. They're also mentioned in the Book of Mormon, but they were not alive in the Americas prior to Europeans bringing them over at the end of the 15th century. We have this documented. Same story with cattle and pigs. Mormon apologists have argued that cattle is a term that has been used to describe a wide variety of domesticated animals. So Joseph must have meant some other creature when he said cattle. And sheep in the Book of Mormon means bighorn sheep, right? Or llamas, according to apologists. But modern llamas did not exist anywhere in the area of what is now the United States, anywhere near the time that ancient Mormons supposedly lived in that area. Bighorn sheep have never been domesticated.
And you see, that's one thing that happens. What he's talking about there is kind of that walk back that the prophets have done with policies, with different doctrine or explanations, where it's like, if you're in the church in the 1950s, they're like, oh yeah, for sure, the scriptures say there's sheep there. That means there was 100% means there were sheep, like literal sheep. And then they'll walk it back and be like, oh, well, maybe they weren't like literal sheep. Maybe they were this. And then they'll walk it back a little bit more as more evidence comes out. And I think they've done this with genetics too. What was that? The Ancestry.com or the DNA test that everybody was doing, like 20andMe or something like that. In the church, you're taught that you're part of a tribe. And I mean, that's more of a spiritual thing, but a lot of people believe that it was literal. You're literally a descendant from this tribe of Israel. So there was that. And then, the believing that the Israelites came over. Some people from Jewish descent came over and literally started the Native Americans. But then you find out the DNA evidence doesn't support that. And then there's kind of this walk back too, or I've seen a walk back where it's like, okay, well, you're not literally a descendant from the tribe of Ephraim or whatever. It's more of a spiritual thing. And they've kind of, I think, done a walk back on the, I mean, they still literally believe the story of Nephi and Lehi coming over. But so I'm not really sure what their answer to the genetic disputes are, or the lack of genetic evidence that Israelites came over from the Middle East. I think maybe they said that there's, I think I've heard that, well, maybe it's just a dilution, like there were other natives here, and eventually their DNA kind of snuffed out or overpowered the Nephite and Lamanite DNA. But again, that seems like kind of a walk back, or it's like, when you find more information, then you got to create a new part of the story to justify the relevance of the previous part of the story that wouldn't make sense anymore if you just stuck with the original story to begin with. So I've seen that happen with quite a few things, and I'm sure other people have too.
Archaeologists have argued that when swine are being discussed in the Book of Mormon, the animal being referred to is actually little javelinas, little peccaries. However, again, these animals didn't exist when the Mormons supposedly existed, as far as like the big pigs, and then the little javelinas, they've never been domesticated. Barley and wheat are also mentioned. Those crops were not grown in North America prior to the arrival of Europeans. Horses are mentioned many times in Mormon texts. The book of Enos 1:21 says, "And it came to pass that the people of Nephi did till the land and raise all manner of grain and of fruit and flocks of herds and also many horses." Like it says specifically horses. Horses for sure specifically did not exist. How is this all explained by the church? Honestly, not well. On a website called Book of Mormon Central, meant to be used as a study resource when reading the Book of Mormon, there's a general answer for why nothing that happened that in the Book of Mormon is supported by archaeological records. They say, it is not unusual for primary source documents to mention things which archaeologists cannot prove. In fact, it is expected that authentic documents will give us new information about the past. And then a Mormon scholar and historian named Stephen D. Ricks cited as the author of that quote, and Stephen also says in another book, to accept only those elements of the Book of Mormon or any other document for that matter that accord with what is already known is to refuse it any primary evidentiary value and to render the Book of Mormon or any other document superfluous. Okay, well, using that logic, I could say that I wasn't kidding about Nimrod. He's real. You know what? He's real. There really is a giant space Sasquatch out there the size of a galaxy with suns for eyes and the head of a chupacabra riding a black unicorn that demands that you crush cocker spaniels to death to make blood sacrifices, proving your loyalty unto him. It's true. You just need to accept me talking about it as having primary evidentiary value. Stephen Rick's explanation is just a very academic sounding way of saying it's real because we say it's real. Please, no more questions. I mean, there's just, again, steel and iron are also mentioned several times in the Book of Mormon. No evidence has been found in the Americas of iron being hardened to make steel in ancient times. The Book of Mormon describes more than one literate people inhabiting ancient America. The Nephite people described as possessing.
See, and this is crazy because this is for sure stuff you would find archaeological evidence about. If there were, all these different types of animals, these different types of crops, steel doesn't just go away, right? And if they're not finding any of this stuff there, it's one of the things that Mormons tell you to do is they tell you to read the Book of Mormon, to pray about it, to know if it's true. And if the Book of Mormon's true, then Joseph Smith must be a true prophet, right? And if Joseph Smith is a true prophet, then what Joseph Smith taught is also true. And that's kind of how you start the snowball effect, or how you build your faith into believing the Mormon doctrine. Is it all really, they tell you it all really rests on whether or not the Book of Mormon is true. And there's no evidence, archaeological evidence supporting it. You can pray and feel good about it, but it's hard to explain away these major differences, or not even differences, just major errors in the Book of Mormon. Like, you're not finding, oops, sorry, there goes my camera. Like there's literally, and I mean, we have great technology. We have planes, we have drones, we have X-ray technology, we have sound waves, we have lasers, we have all this stuff that can detect different things, and they haven't found any evidence to support any of this, as far as I know, or as far as Dan has found out on his research. And I haven't really seen any evidence either, and so it doesn't look good. And if your whole faith in the church rests on the Book of Mormon being true, then this is a pretty damning point right here, or damning counter argument, showing that it might not be true. I mean, if they got that wrong, what else isn't literally true in there? So yeah. Anyways, let's continue on.
A language and writing. They were able to write on metal. Their writing had roots in Hebrew and Egyptian. They say that the original text of the Book of Mormon is written in this unknown language called Reformed Egyptian. But there's other than the golden tablets that Joseph supposedly found, there's nothing else. And those tablets, highly questionable that they existed. But other than that, no other ancient Hebrew Egyptian writings have been found in the Americas. Nothing. There's nothing that's been found. Nothing in a museum. Not one flipping thing. And that's a little bit suspicious. What the people who wrote in the Bible may not be true, but at least we know that people did write back then. It was written in the correct language for its historical place and period. So, had to get that out there. I know it's not fun to hear if you're a believer, but it's the truth. I'm not going to hide from it. On December 23rd, 1805, Joseph Smith...
and that's one of the big claims in the Mormon Church is that, they're always seeking for the truth. They, Christ is supposedly the truth, the way, the truth, and the life. And so if you're looking for the truth, but then you're not, and you claim to represent the ultimate truth, but then you're not recognizing actual physical, archaeological truth that's out there, it's something to think about too. So yeah, we'll go on.
Technically, Joseph Smith Jr. is born in Sharon, Vermont. That did happen. There are birth records. He's the fifth child and fourth son of Lucy Mack and Joseph Smith Sr. Joseph Smith Jr. came from what has been described as an unremarkable New England family. I would disagree with what we're about to learn about them. His grandfather, Azael Smith, lost most of his property in Topsfield, Massachusetts during the economic downturn of the 1780s and eventually moved to Vermont, where Smith's father, Joseph Sr., initially established himself as a farmer. Turns out Joe Sr., not a good farmer. More on that as his timeline continues. Joseph Jr. would have 9 siblings overall, but only 7 at any given time since 2 of the 9 died soon after birth. Story of the Smith brothers and sisters is pretty tragic. Lucy Mack Smith would go on to bury 7 of her 10 total children while she was still living. Lucy Mack came from a Connecticut family that had disengaged from conventional congregationalism and leaned towards Seekerism when it came to their faith. Seekerism, a movement that looked for a new revelation to restore true Christianity to its pure roots. Really weird. What are the odds that the son of a woman, part of a movement dedicated to waiting for God to grant a new revelation, restoring the Christian church to whatever seekers thought it should be restored to, would raise a son who would grow up and then have that exact revelation? It's almost like he became a prophet because he was raised to believe that you could become a prophet. Sorry, my heck. Forgive my use of cold reason and obvious logic. Sorry to take a doo-doo on the Joseph parade. Although privately religious, the Smith family rarely attended church. Joseph Sr. and his sons spent part of the warm weather months treasure hunting, using various divination tools, including seer stones, that when viewed in the bottom of a hat were said to convey a special sight from God to help you find buried treasure. Flippin' what? A guy whose mother raised him to think God would speak to someone and give them instructions on how to restore the church to its rightful glory. A guy whose father raised him to be a magical treasure hunter. Magical treasure hunter. That guy would find magical treasure that God revealed to him to help him restore the church to its rightful glory. Shut the front door. Are you flipping Josh and me? It almost feels like parental environment contributed more to Joseph's revelations than the word of God. In 1811, after another failed crop harvest, it was almost like spending a lot of time using seer stones to find magical treasure didn't help farming. The Smith family moved to Lebanon, New Hampshire, where their financial situation improved a bit and the Smith children were finally able to begin school. Then in 1812, a local typhoid epidemic swept through Lebanon, killed upwards of 6,000 people. Typhoid hit the Smith children, although none died. Young Joseph did develop a leg infection. The doctors initially thought would require amputation, but a novel type of surgery saved the boy's limb. He'd use crutches for the next 3 years and would walk with a limp for the rest of his life.
All right, so a little sidebar here is this story of Joseph Smith getting surgery on his leg when he was young. That was a kind of a important backstory that people would bring up, because he was they had to do surgery on him, and back in that day they would give someone alcohol as an anesthetic because they didn't have modern day pain medicine or modern day anesthesia. And it was told that Joseph Smith refused taking alcohol because I don't remember the rationale behind it, but he refused, even as a kid, he refused taking any alcohol into his body because he didn't feel that it was right, and he wanted to do it without it. So it was both kind of showing that Joseph Smith is this figure that he was a strong individual, that he didn't rely on drugs, and that he refused to take something bad into his body, which is significant because when you grow up Mormon, you're taught that alcohol is bad and that you shouldn't drink alcohol or smoke cigarettes or do any drugs. However, what's ironic about this, or even more ironic about it, is I believe that Joseph Smith did drink alcohol later in life. In fact, I think he drank beer, and I'll have to find, I believe I have a quote on this from Mormon history, and if I do, I'll throw it up on the screen here so you can read it. But so that was just kind of a interesting story. You know how like George Washington, you have the story of him chopping down the cherry tree and not being able to tell a lie. It's just interesting how different organizations, whether it be governments or religions, they like to tell stories about people's childhoods to make them seem like hey, if you're a good kid, you'll grow up to be a good adult, sort of thing. Even though the George Washington story about the cherry tree, that wasn't true either. And if you want to find more about that, I actually did a video on George Washington too, so you can look for that on my channel. But anyways, continuing on with the
Smith family continued to not farm well. In 1816, following a third straight year of crop failure, the Smith family moved to Palmyra, New York, a town of 4,000 situated near the planned route of the Erie Canal. Palmyra lies within a very interesting area at that time, termed the Burned Over District. This is super important to today's story. It was in the Burned Over District, called that because of its evangelical fervor of its residents. Right? It was called the Burned Over District because spiritual fervor seemed to set the area on fire. In addition to Mormonism, coming out of this spiritual hotbed, the Jehovah's Witnesses, the Seventh-day Adventists, and many other pretty radical departures from traditional Christians' beliefs popped up. A lot of those kind of fringy Christian denominations all came out of the same little area at the same time as Mormonism. Love learning stuff like that. Such cool history. And the story of Joseph Smith makes so much more sense to me now. His dad was a treasure hunter who believed in basically sorcery. Seer stones, by the way, literal stones used by treasure hunters to try and receive revelations from God to find buried treasure. Right? Using rocks to find buried treasure makes about as much sense as sticking your pinky up a raccoon's butt in order to find a dragon. Sorry about the language. Should have said bottom. But come on. I mean, it's so wackadoodle. Like it's off the charts. And this is Joseph's dad. And Joseph himself would later do this. And his mom, who become a future bigwig in the early Mormon church, doesn't go to church because she thinks churches are, they're not Jesus in the right way. And God eventually is going to, have a new person lead people. And her family is living in a place and time, right, where more new religions would spring up than anywhere else in America before or since. Of course, Joseph found golden tablets and started a new religion. He was raised by the right parents and grew up in the exact right place to do that. In 1820, Joseph Smith, now 14, has become increasingly...
Yeah, so the Mormon rationale behind this would be that, well, yes, of course he was raised by the right people in the right environment. In fact, the whole reason the Pilgrims came over here and democracy was invented over here was so that the Church of God could be restored. So that's what we're always taught in church, is that all of this was prepared for the church to come forth at the right time with the right people. So Mormons would look at most of that information as actually a positive. However, this is a very different version or explanation of that, a very different twist on it than what you're told growing up. I don't think I ever learned that the seer stones existed before Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon, because that's what we were told he used to translate the Book of Mormon. But now, according to this history, or this evidence or research, Joseph Smith and his dad used seer stones to find or hunt for buried treasure before. That paints a completely different story. And if that's all true, then it paints Joseph Smith and his dad and his family and the whole future of the church and how it came about, and the finding and translating in the Book of Mormon, in a very, very different light than what we were taught in the Mormon church and what most Mormons believe. And I think if most people in the church found out about this, they found out that it was credible, I don't know how that would change their... I mean, it would have to change at least a few people's beliefs about the translation of and finding of the Book of Mormon.
Increasingly troubled by denominational differences among local Christians, because there's all kinds of spirited debates about religion going on all around him. He remains unsure about which church is the right one to follow, as were many other people at the time, so he prays for guidance. The answer would come one spring morning. Smith goes out into the woods near his home, and as he describes it, witnesses a pillar of light descending from heaven, followed by an image of God and Jesus, who were apparently perceived by Joseph as separate personages. They forgave him of his sins and warned Smith that all denominations of Christianity, all of them, have strayed from the truth, and that he should not join any of them. Mother will be so happy! No one's heads need to go on sticks now, not when God has made Mother's son the chosen one. Won't even have to flip Mother's neck. Little Ed Kemper flashback, new listeners. It happens. Happens sometimes. Smith relayed this vision to a local minister, and the man of the conventional church dismissed it as delusion, scorned the teenager. Mormonism could have ended there, but Smith continued to believe in the authenticity of his alleged moment in the woods with God and Jesus. This event, known to Mormons as the first vision, still does not dramatically change Smith's life. He continues to work the farm and to seek out Illuminati pirate treasure with his father. Smith will not give his followers a detailed description of this vision until 1839, when the Book of Mormon was published in 1830. Why wait another 9 years? I gotta say, the skeptic in me thinks that's how long it took for him to make it all up. On September 21st, 1823, the young Joe Jr., fearing that he has fallen off the right path, prays for forgiveness for all his sins and follies. Once again, he receives a vision. This time it's in his bedroom, and the vision is of the angel Moroni. One letter off. Moroni, the son of Mormon, speaks of a sacred book written on gold plates that just so happened to be buried in a nearby hillside. Sweet! Jackpot! Papa, throw away the pirate rock! We have an angel now telling us where the treasure is. According to Moroni, the book describes the people who used to inhabit America and the source from whence they sprang. He also said it contains the fullness of the everlasting gospel. The next day, September 22nd, guided by his vision, Smith locates the golden book in a box buried in Hill Cumorah, 3 miles from the Smith farm. However, he is told by Moroni that he cannot take the gold plates yet. Instead, he must return on September 22nd for each of the next 4 years to be instructed on the mission God has in store for him. Seems reasonable. I mean, why let him quickly transcribe the plates and get a head start on saving souls when instead God can make him needlessly wait for 4 years? Why instruct him to take the tablets to a group of open-minded religious scholars with connections to museum curators who could maybe verify their historical authenticity or guard them until some respected archaeological theologian could come along and give the whole thing a little bit more legitimacy? Mysterious ways. How mysterious, super confusing ways.
Yeah. So a lot of Mormons believe that if he had done this, that yeah, and this goes back to the whole war in heaven, good versus evil. Like everything is a war for people's souls. So you have the army of God and you have the army of Satan, and Mormons believe that if he had done this, that everybody else was on Satan's team, and he's kind of like this lone warrior for God, and if he'd told people that there's these gold plates, that people would have just tried to steal them for money or whatever, and so they're like, oh no, he had to do it on his own, sort of thing, which is I'm sure has some validity to it, but at the same time, like, I don't know, that's just not really how you do things. But I don't know. Maybe if you think everybody around you is corrupt and you're the only one capable of it, then yeah. But yeah, at the same time, that is also it's kind of suspicious. Yeah, why not go to the authorities and show them to a lot of people? That's a common criticism of the Book of Mormon story. So nothing new, but yeah, definitely interesting.
Smith was told by the creators of the universe not to touch the box, but he did anyway. So he received the shock of God, literally an electric shock, and was thrown to the ground. Ha, gotcha! Classic God move. Got him with a little God shock. That's what God does. He shocks people. Don't follow instructions. We all know that. November 19th, 1823, several weeks later, death hits the Smith family. Joseph's eldest brother, Alvin, dies at the age of 25. This puts a greater financial strain on the family, but even worse for Joseph Jr., he loses a great ally in his older brother as far as someone who believes that he's had these visions. Or so he says. Alvin believed in Joseph, according to Joseph, and his visions from the beginning. And Joseph took Alvin's death very hard. Alvin Smith was the second son born to Joseph Sr. and Lucy. Because their first child died prematurely, Alvin was the oldest. In October of 1825, with multiple visions under his belt now, Joe Jr. and his father joined a treasure hunting expedition 135 miles away in Harmony, Pennsylvania. Their goal is to find the dream mine, and they don't, which is weird because the wizard rock told him exactly where it was. It's another thing that troubles me about this story. It's like he's able to find the tablets. Why can't he find the dream mine? That it could be verified by other people. It's funny how, he never found anything that could be verified by anybody else. Smith does find another kind of treasure. Lady treasure, Hale Lucifina. He meets and falls in love with 21-year-old Emma Hale. While boarding at her father's house, the two constantly met secretly at a friend's house. Over the winter months of 1825, Joe worked on perfecting his weird seer stone techniques. In March of 1826, a criminal complaint is sworn out against Smith for the fraudulent use of said seer stones. He admits to using them in the past, but says he has now given up the practice. For many, Smith is seen as a wackadoodle, which I get. On January 17th or 18th, 1827, Joseph Smith and Emma Hale elope and get married in South Bainbridge, New York. The marriage went against both the bride's mother's and father's wishes. The angry parents did not like Smith's religious practices and the fact that he was a seer-using treasure hunter, which, is not exactly the job most parents hope for, that they're in their future son-in-law. Emma was the seventh of 9 children of Isaac Hale and Elizabeth Lewis. She was born in Willingboro Township, later called Harmony, Susquehanna County, Pennsylvania. While Emma's brothers and sisters attended only the traditional grammar school growing up, Emma went on to do an extra year of schooling beyond that. So, she got like 7 years of school, so she's extra smart. She is known in church history for being well-educated, comparatively, and was able to act as a scribe for Joseph when he was translating the plates because of it, because Joseph was not very literate. There isn't a ton of information on Emma's early years, but she would go on to play a pivotal role in the early church. On September 22nd, 1827, after 4 years have passed, Smith is finally allowed to dig those gold plates up, or at least that is what he would tell people. As he digs up the golden books, he's warned by Moroni not to let anyone else see them, which again makes a lot of sense. Why have witnesses to the greatest discovery of all time? Smith then shows his mother an unusual pair of spectacles she would use to read the divine golden pages with. The story just keeps getting better, for flip's sake. The magic spectacles, came complete with 2 precious stones where the eyepieces would normally be. Do you understand what I'm saying? He's wearing the glasses with rocks, with magic rocks. I just want to be clear. These stones are called interpreters. Smith himself said the Lord provided him 2 stones and silver bows. He called the Urim and the Thummim, told his mother all about what he was up to. He said that, stones would help him translate the books from the Reformed Egyptian written, into English. And then before he could translate, rumors of a golden Bible began to circulate in the neighborhood. And Joseph and Emma Smith were forced to flee the threat of potential thieves. The couple were financially assisted by a local farmer named Martin Harris as they set out for Harmony, hiding the golden plates in a barrel of beans. Now, before we continue with the timeline, there's a bit of information that really must be kept in mind during this next bit of narrative and then addressed. Gold is super flippin' heavy. Several LDS historians and church manuals have repeated the story given by Lucy Mack Smith, the mother of the Mormon prophet. In her account, she says that her son took the plates from their secret place and then, quote, wrapping them in his linen frock, placed them under his arm and started for home. After traveling some distance, he came to a large windfall. And as he was jumping over a log, a man sprang up from behind it and gave him a heavy blow with the gun. Joseph turned around and knocked him down, then ran at the top of his speed. She went on to say her son was attacked twice more, and since there's no record of Smith rendering his assailants unconscious or incapacitated, we must assume he outran them for at least a portion of the distance necessary to reach the Smith home, reportedly 3 miles away. He also did all of this with that limp from childhood leg surgery, while carrying a huge slab of gold under his arms. How big and heavy were these tablets? Contemporaries of Smith gave varying dimensions for the plates, as well as a wide range of estimated weights. Some say the plates weighed as much as 60 pounds, while others, like Joseph Smith's father, said the plates weighed as little as 30 pounds. Smith claimed the record he received from the angel was 6 inches wide, 8 inches long, not quite so thick as common tin. He also said the volume was something near 6 inches in thickness, a part of which was sealed. Given those dimensions, we could conclude that the plates were 1/6 of a cubic foot. Since gold weighs 1,204 pounds per cubic foot, we can argue with LDS Apostle John. We can agree with LDS Apostle John Widstow, who said if the gold were pure, the plates would weigh 200 pounds, which would be a heavy weight for a man to carry, even though he were of the athletic type of Joseph Smith. 200 pounds, jumping over logs, running at top speed. That's more than a heavy weight for a man to carry. It would be truly miraculous for someone to not just carry that weight, but run with it for 3 miles. Barry Sanders in his prime could not have done that. The world's strongest man could not do that. Remember, his mother said that Joseph held these plates under his arm. No one could do that for 1 mile, let alone 3. You don't believe me? Go to the lumber yard. Go to Home Depot or Lowe's, any big hardware store. Grab a 60-pound bag of concrete, cement mix. Put it in your arm and try running with it. Better yet, try holding one under each arm and running with that. Bring in 2 canvas bags. Put a 60-pound bag of cement in each one. See how running works out for you. Or at the gym, grab 200-pound dumbbells and just take off running. There is no flipping way you would make it even 200 yards without dropping those bad boys or seriously injuring yourself, let alone fight people off. Those several illustrations of the plates depict what looks like a virtual compressed set of metal sheets. Mormon apologists often insist that the handmade gold plates would not lay perfectly flat, thus allowing for air gaps between the leaves, making them much lighter. This argument ignores the fact that gold, while an extremely dense metal, is also soft. The very weight of the plates themselves would eliminate air gaps, thus making the plates a virtual block of gold. Realizing that the story is told is quite impossible, many Mormons resort to assuming that God gave Smith supernatural, miraculous strength to carry the plates, even though he never said that. But you know what? Fine. You can't argue with magic. You win. In December of 1827, Emma's father allows the couple to stay in a small house on his property. There, Joseph begins the task of translating the strange writing of the ancient golden book using his seer stone interpretation device and dictating the results to Emma. Emma described what she saw as she worked as her father's scribe. She said, I frequently wrote day after day, often sitting at the table close by him sitting with his face buried in his hat, with a stone in it, dictating hour after hour with nothing between us. Now what? There's no gold plates, and now there's a hat involved, a magic hat. It worked like this. Smith would place a rock, one of the seer stones in a hat, and then a piece of something resembling parchment would appear, and on that, parchment appeared writing. One character at a time, and under it was the interpretation in English. Since such descriptions show how Smith didn't need to look at the plates at all, one can only wonder, why did he have to risk, his safety to find them in the first place? So where were the plates while he was doing this? Who knows? It's very likely that no one ever saw the plates in the traditional way of seeing things. Like no one held them or touched them. Maybe not even Joseph. right? According, because he ran with him, right? But I mean, the story, it's so confusing. Mormon historian Marvin Hill concedes that the evidence is extremely contradictory in this area, but there's a possibility that witnesses saw the plates in visions, and in visions only. As in they all used seer stones tossed into a magic hat to see the plate in their mind's eye. So all the people, there's all these early witnesses is what the church teaches saw these plates. But it may be that instead of seeing them, like looking at hey, there's a gold plate across the room. It was a very different thing of look into this hat full of rocks and see them there. See the vision of them. In a revelation recorded in Doctrine and Covenants, 17:2, Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Martin Harris were told that it was by faith they would obtain a view of the plates. 8 more men insisted that they too, quote unquote, saw the plates. But again, the evidence suggests they saw them with, quote unquote, spiritual eyes.
See, now this is interesting because I think most people in the church are taught or believe that there were witnesses who actually physically held the plates and saw them. So this would be, I don't know if contradictory is the right word. I think this would surprise most people in the church hearing this. Maybe Dan has it wrong here, but maybe not. Maybe, he's usually pretty good about his research, but that if someone had told me that on my mission, I would have been like, no, the witnesses actually physically held them. But maybe I was told wrong, or read it wrong growing up. So look into that a little more too.
Or in visions. Smith also asserted that John the Baptist appeared to him while he was translating the golden plates and instructed him to restore the church by preaching the true gospel. So, whatever, fine. He can show up now. In April of 1828, Martin Harris, who has followed Joseph Smith to Harmony, takes up work on the book, writing down Smith's dictations. So this guy is an important part of the origin. He's the original, helper to Joseph Smith to transcribe some of these books. It's his wife and also this guy, Martin Harris. Over the next 2 months, Martin and Joseph produce 116 pages of text, the translation of the book of Lehi. But then Harris randomly decides to take the book back to Palmyra to show it to his doubting wife, Lucy Harris, who doesn't buy what he's doing. He'd been spending a lot of time outside the house. She's worried that, Joseph had tricked her husband because her husband had a reputation to believe in wild and crazy tales. Check this stuff out. A biographer would later write that Harris's imagination was excitable and fecund, aka fertile. For example, Harris once perceived a sputtering candle to be the work of the devil. And then this is really good. An acquaintance once said that Harris claimed to have seen Jesus in the shape of a deer and then walked and talked with the Jesus deer for 2 or 3 miles. Shut the front door! What? This guy walked and talked with a Jesus deer for a couple miles? That seems like he's a real solid critical thinker, this guy. Seems super stable.
See, and to most rational people who don't believe in religion or magic, that would seem incredible. But if you go back and look at the things in the Bible, like, there's that story of that donkey talking to somebody in the Bible. And so if you already believe that sort of thing or are raised to believe in magic or magical things, then, that could be a believable thing. Well, maybe he did. Maybe he was talking to God and God was preparing him all along for this incredible mission, But on the other hand, to people who don't believe in that sort of stuff or are more, it sounds derogatory to say living in the real world, but I mean, for most people, like if somebody came up to you and was like, hey, yeah, I was talking to this deer in the forest and the deer was actually God, are you going to believe that person 9 times out of 10? Or are you going to think they're crazy? For most people that seems crazy, because most people who would claim to be talking to, a God deer would probably be crazy. So, two sides to this coin, but, statistically that's pretty crazy and that story's pretty crazy. But, from a religious belief aspect, if you're willing to believe in the other things that religions teach you, then, that's not so unbelievable.
Not prone to, seeing what he wants to see. Good old burned over district. So many fun thoughts floating around. I'm surprised J.R. Tolkien didn't write The Lord of the Rings there. I feel like I keep sounding like an a-hole, but I wish this origin story was so much better. I truly do. I've met so many wonderful Mormons. They have consistently, in my experience, shown themselves to be amazing people, family-oriented, fit, hardworking, smart, well-educated, active, cool, flipping folks. I don't want to, drop a pile of doohickey on their beliefs. I don't, but come on, the story is what it is. I'm open to people having visions. I'm open to worlds beyond this one. I really, truly am. But a talking Jesus deer, treasure hunting stones. I cannot take this stuff seriously. It sounds like the ramblings of lunatics. If Jesus wanted to talk to Martin Harris, why in the flip would he need to possess a deer? He's all powerful, right? I mean, possessing a deer feels like the trick of a bottom shelf sorcerer, like some necromancer who'd figured out how to project his own consciousness back into the earth from death itself. Impressive, but he's not quite strong enough to appear as like a cool hologram or take over a human being. He's got to pop into a deer. He didn't pay attention in some class in sorcery school. Maybe it's a deer on a good day too. Maybe like other days he can only get into like a groundhog or a squirrel. Anyway, there's a lot of stories like this in Martin's history. Later on, when Harris departed from New York with the Latter-day Saints, the local paper wrote, several families numbering about 50 souls took up their line of march from this town last week for the Promised Land, among whom was Martin Harris, one of the original believers in the Book of Mormon. Mr. Harris was among the early settlers of this town and has ever borne the character of an honorable and upright man and an obliging and benevolent neighbor. He had secured to himself by honest industry a respectable fortune, and he has left a large circle of acquaintances and friends to pity his delusion. Yikes. Pity his delusion. Not a good write-up. And this is written in a place used to a lot of people who had a lot of new, religious ideas. Now back to the issue of Harris's wife wanting to see what the heck Martin was up to. She wanted to see those supposed gold words. Joseph Smith reluctantly agreed to part with the new scripture. Makes sense. Why not risk getting it lost? It's only God's new prophecy. Harris takes the only copy of the 116 pages of God talk and then flipping loses them. Yep. June 15th, 1828, just days after Martin had left, Joseph's wife, Emma Smith, gave birth to a child the couple would name Alvin. Unfortunately, Alvin Smith died the same day. Emma almost died as well. This would start a terrible pattern of only 5 of Emma's 11 children living beyond infancy. I not wish that sorrow on anyone. Adding to Joseph's sorrow, weeks had passed with no word from Martin Harris about the original 116 pages. Smith decided to leave Emma, still recovering from her difficult pregnancy, in the care of her parents and travel to Palmyra. He quickly finds out, Harris's lost the work, gone forever, and no one ever knows what happened to it. Maybe Martin's dog ate it. Lucy Max Smith recalled her son crying out when he learned the pages were gone, saying, "It is I who have tempted the wrath of God. I should have been satisfied with the first answer which I received from the Lord." The records say that Smith begged God for forgiveness, but instead of forgiveness, an angel appeared and took away his golden plates as punishment. Dang it! What a heckin' bummer! The magic gold tablets that would have, really gone a long way towards proving that Joseph was not just making this malarkey up, were taken from him. How unfortunate. Smith also would say that his magic seer stones, also got, taken away. Frick, man. His awesome golden tablets and his wizard stones, all gone. Wouldn't be until September 22nd, 1828, that Smith would get the gold plates back. Luckily, he gets his seer stone spectacles back and his magic hat as well. Jeepers creepers. Man, JC really putting old Smith through the proverbial ringer. Holy heck. Needless to say, Martin's not allowed to hold the divine manuscript again. Oh, Martin's put out in the super frickin' naughty pants timeout corner list. On April 5th, 1829, a young schoolteacher, distant relative of Joseph's named Oliver Cowdery, arrives in Harmony, becomes a scribe for Smith as he resumes translation of the gold plates. Old Marty is out. The two men transcribe the plates much faster than before. But was the Book of Lehi the same as the initial lost 116 pages? Nope. According to Smith, he did not translate or retranslate the material that Harris had lost because he said that if he did, evil men would alter the manuscript in an effort to discredit him, because that doesn't make any sense. Smith said that instead he had been divinely ordered to replace the lost material with Nephi's account of these same events. Or Smith wasn't happy with the first draft. Maybe he wanted a chance to kind of rewrite it. Maybe losing those papers was, just kind of a planned thing. In the midst of the second translation on May 15th, 1829, Cowdery and Smith take a break to hang out in the woods and pray. They are visited by none other than John the Baptist. Here comes Johnny! And John confers the Aaronic priesthood, also known as the Levitical priesthood, upon them. John the Baptist also tells the two young men that the Melchizedek priesthood, the greater of the two priesthoods, will also be restored. And then when it is restored, it will give them power to lay on hands for the gift of the Holy Ghost. So many flipping priesthoods, so many wizard levels. Wish I was a wizard. In anticipation of the organization of the Church of Christ, John the Baptist announces to the young men that Smith will be the first elder of the church, Cowdery II. The two men then baptize each other in the Susquehanna River. In June of 1829, Smith, who has now completed the translation at Peter Whitmer's farm in Fayette, New York, receives a copyright for the Book of Mormon. 11 witnesses will later sign statements saying that they have seen the gold plates from which the Book of Mormon was translated. But again, did they see him or did they have visions? A lot of different tales about how the plates were seen floating out there. By June of 1829, the Book of Mormon manuscript and the articles of the Church of Jesus or of Christ, compiled by Olive Cowdery, had identified ecclesiastical roles to preach, baptize, and administer the Lord's Supper. These documents identified the specific offices of elder, priest, and teacher and outlined their respective duties, getting organized now. Also in June 1829, Joseph Smith receives a revelation that Oliver Cowdery and David Whitmer should seek out 12 men who would be the Lord's disciples and would declare my gospel both unto Gentile and to Jew. For the next years, Cowdery's and Whitmer's minds are on a constant stretch to find who these 12 were. They periodically sought the Lord by fasting and prayer to know. On top of being an apostle, in August of 1829, Smith locates a publisher for the Book of Mormon in Palmyra, and typesetting begins. The 5,000 copy initial print run is financed by a $3,000 mortgage on Marty Harris's farm. It's the least Marty could do after that lasso whoopsie when he flipping lost the word of God. On March 26, 1830, the Book of Mormon is published. The first printed copies are available in Palmyra, New York, each copy selling for $1.25. And man, I bet if you had one of those, that is worth some money. Brigham Young, practicing Methodist, who has moved to the area near Palmyra with his wife, reads the Book of Mormon shortly after publication and is baptized as a Mormon 2 years later. His conversion would turn out to be a very important one in regards to the survival of the Mormon faith. On April 6, 1830, the first organized meeting of the LDS is held at the Whitmer Farm in Fayette Township, New York, with about 50 people in attendance. Smith and Cowdery are ordained elders. Smith will become known as a prophet. That very week, the first officially appointed missionary, Samuel Harrison Smith, the prophet's brother, departs to preach the gospel in Upper New York and Vermont. By the end of the year, at least 16 men were sent to spread the message that God had spoken to a prophet and revealed the Book of Mormon. Things are looking pretty darn good. But then in June of 1830, Smith is arrested and charged with being a disorderly person for his preaching. Cheese and crackers, son of a bishop! Why couldn't they leave him to flip alone? Looking at numerous sources about Smith, we found that he seems to have been arrested quite a few times in his short life. There are claims of Smith being arrested 30 to 42, or in a few sources, more than 42 times. This particular time, Smith is acquitted. There's actually an entire Wikipedia page dedicated specifically to Joseph Smith and the criminal justice system. And it cites 53 different sources, many of them from Mormon authors, some of them from actual church doctrine. In September of 1830, the first Mormon missionaries are called to preach to what Mormons call the Lamanites, also known as the American Indians. Relations were not good with the tribes, and the few missionaries were able to do very little with his preaching. Gosh darn Lamanites, still wanting to come to the Nephite side of things. Yeah, that's classic Lamanite. If that isn't an example of Lamanites being Lamanites, I don't know what is. In October of 1830, the missionaries taking the Book of Mormon's message to the Indians in Ohio and Missouri have stopped in Kirtland, Ohio. There, a popular Baptist minister named Sidney Rigdon decides to join the LDS and bring his 100-member congregation with him. Big win for the early Mormons. In December of 1830, Joseph's first revelation on gathering is given. In his revaluation, he commands the church to up and move to Ohio. Also around this time, Sidney Rigdon is called to be a scribe in Joseph Smith's planned revision of the Bible. In February of 1831, Joseph and Emma Smith reached Kirtland, while other church members would join them in the spring. For the next 6 years, Smith will be based there and will announce some 65 different revelations, most pertaining to church structure and organization. God's talking to him a lot now. In June of 1831, after missionaries reach Missouri and settle in Independence, Smith leads a group of Mormons from Kirtland west to Independence, which, according to the story, God has revealed will be a gathering place for Mormons in the site of a new Jerusalem. A new Jerusalem. On July 20th, 1831, the site for the city of Zion, the New Jerusalem in Independence, Missouri, is revealed to Joseph the prophet in a revelation. In August of 1831, early Mormons lay the cornerstone for a temple, and within a year, more than 800 more church members have moved to the area. In the first days of November 1831, a conference of church elders decides to print 10,000 copies of what was to be called the Book of Commandments, a compilation of revelations received by the prophet Joseph Smith. These revelations are still considered sacred texts within the LDS faith and have since been incorporated into the Doctrine and Covenants things are looking good for Joe. He has.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and just stop it there. So we made it through the founding of the church. Church is getting on a roll here. So some interesting history. A lot of it, it all pretty much lines up with the Mormon history that is taught in the church, minus some of the details that are omitted, but the general story, the general timeline, everything adds up here with what Dan has found and put into his Timesuck. So it's a pretty good, pretty thorough investigation and recap on Mormon history. I thought it was interesting hearing all that and learning the details that are usually omitted from the story that we're taught in church. If you found it interesting, go ahead and give a like and subscribe. Like I said, I'm going to be putting up a Patreon, and I'll be putting a link to the Timesuck in the description if you want to watch the whole thing. Thank you for tuning in, and I will be coming back at you with some more reviews on this Timesuck and other videos as well in the future. So thank you, and have a good one until next time.